My name is Rory Gillis, and I'm an assistant professor at Western Law. I teach income taxation, constitutional law, a seminar called Social Policy and the Tax and Transfer System, and a graduate class called Issues in Tax Law and Policy. My research looks at how courts respond to sophisticated tax planning by taxpayers. So most of us are probably familiar with reports in the newspapers about the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers. And these are cases where billions of dollars of income from Canadian taxpayers and taxpayers from other countries was found to be held offshore. One of the interesting things about this discovery is most of the money was there legally. It was avoiding Canadian taxes, but no law was being broken. And my research asked the question of how do courts respond to these types of tax planning techniques? I also look at how courts respond to tax competition between jurisdictions. It's very common in Canada, for example, for one province to lower its tax rates or change its tax base to attract taxpayers from another province. And I look at what rules courts use to govern that competition. So one research project I'm working on right now looks at how courts respond to arguments about distributive justice or distributive fairness in tax cases. So governments will often argue that courts should not permit a particular tax planning technique because it creates a loophole or opens up a gap in tax legislation, and that primarily benefits high-income taxpayers. So I'm looking right now at 5 different countries, Canada, the United States, Australia, India, and the United Kingdom, to see how courts in those countries respond to that argument and whether that argument is found to be convincing by courts, and if not, why not? And the reason I look at this is because most lawyers and law students, when they first take tax law, take it because it's one of the fields of law that is seen to be most closely related to the distribution of income. But I think any tax lawyer would acknowledge that once you start practicing tax law, references to distributive justice or distributive fairness are rare. And so one of the questions I looked at is, why is this the case? One objective of my research is to show students that tax law, for all its complexity, raises many of the most important questions in law generally, such as what is a fair distribution of resources, how certain should legal roles be, and what is the relationship between courts and the legislature. A second objective is to make recommendations to courts and legislatures on how they should respond to some of the pressing problems in tax law and policy. So for example, is there anything that courts and governments can do to minimize the amount of income and wealth that is shifted offshore? Third objective is to address some of the foundational questions in law. So for example, does distributive justice have a role to play in legal interpretation, or is that a question for legislatures and not for courts?